Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. Live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
43 goals in 3 days in Major League Soccer this weekend. Who said soccer was boring? I don't know, but they were wrong. Joining us online this morning to talk about New York and other beautiful soccer stories this weekend, Michael Lewis of Big Apple Soccer. Michael, how you doing this morning?
I'm very good. Great to be on again.
Michael, one of the stories that sort of prompted us to ask you was, of course, the Arsene Wenger retiring on the last week, and the speculation that Patrick Vieira might be someone that would be in line for that job. So let's start there. As someone who follows him closely, who has seen him up close, what are your thoughts on him right now, and is he ready to take such a step?
Yeah, that's the big question that I think a lot of people are asking these days. First of all, I think Patrick Vieira has grown into his role as NYCFC coach. I think he has gotten better. He has learned how to use the MLS system, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but just learning the good, the bad, and the ugly of the salary caps, TAM, whatever else is there. I know he's got good people around him, but he's turned into a very good man manager. He has a very good eye for talent and putting the team together. As we all know, they have the best record this year, 5-1-2. They lost their first game last night, 3-0 in Portland. But he's done a very good job of turning a pretty abysmal expansion team around into an MLS power in a short period of time. The big question is he ready? I guess there are two ways to look at it. From, let's say, our perspective here in North America, it looks like he would be. After 2.5 years, he has done a good job of reworking the team. There are only 2 players left from the 2015 NYCFC team. That's David Villa and Tommy McNamara. So he's basically put the team into his what he's wanted to do into his image, and he's been quite successful. You take a look at it from England, they're going to say, heck, look how inexperienced he is. He's only coached in MLS. He's only coached 2+ years there. My gut feeling is I think he is on the verge of being ready. I think he should be given a shot. There are a lot of ex-players who move right into coaching over here and overseas as well too. So sometimes you throw someone into the deep end of the pool, and let's face it, a long-time Arsenal standout, a beloved figure there, did a lot of great things during their glory days. I know it's difficult a lot of times to follow a legend. We also what happened when Sir Alex Ferguson left Manchester United. Things didn't work out too well early on, but I'd like to see him go over there. I'm not trying to push him out. I personally like Patrick Vieira, but there might be other circumstances that might be keeping him in New York. He has said that he enjoys living here and he wants to finish out this project here. And I think what he means by that is he'd like to win an MLS championship. Of course, a team like Toronto FC might have something to say about that.
Well, the early days yet on that one for this year, of course. The one thing I will say about Patrick Vieira, and maybe I'll get your comments on this after, is that having watched his career so far as a manager, he's not done things the easy way, which he really could have with the name that he had, with the career that he had. He, rather than jump straight in at a club, he went through the process of trying different things out at Manchester City. He coached the Manchester City Elite Development Squad, youth team first, and then he went to MLS. Not exactly the path you'd expect from a guy like Vieira. He's very thoughtful about how he approaches his managerial career. So I wonder, beyond his desire to finish the project, so to speak, whether or not he just feels that he needs that. Do you think he thinks he's ready, is I guess what I'm saying?
That's a good question, and I guess only he knows that. Let's face it, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes with Manchester City. If they think he's ready, that's an important thing. And also how much, they might say, hey, here's a multi-million-dollar contract. Take it or leave it. We don't know if you're going to get another offer like this. And at 41, he's 41 years old. This would be a good time, quote unquote, to go. Bad time for NYCFC, or in the middle of a season, having a very good start, and it would be a tough act to follow, no matter who was brought in. But I'd like to think he thinks he's ready. He's a confident coach. I think he's comfortable in his skin, and the times I've talked to him on and off the record. I think he's ready for something like that, and I understand it's a different world in England than it is in MLS. I mean, you're going to be under scrutiny every time you scratch your nose. They're going to say, okay, what did he mean by that? But I think he would be a good successor to Arsene Wenger. I'm sorry.
And Michael, when we're looking at this first defeat for NYCFC on the road to Portland, it was bound to happen. We all know that an undefeated season, it's very difficult, and Patrick Vieira knows something about that. The question is the one in Portland on the road acceptable? When you're looking at the schedule, the games that they actually won at the beginning of the season, and this one, was it always a trap game?
Yeah, especially a team like Portland that's been struggling. It's crazy because NYCFC had a ridiculous possession advantage in the game. And I'll tell you this: I'm kind of old school. I don't go by all these new statistics. How many touches a player has on the ball, this or that. To me, it's what you do with the ball when you have it. Whether you have one touch or 100 touches, what do you do with the ball? And NYCFC might have had long stretches of possession last night, but they didn't do what they were supposed to do, and that was put the ball away when the few opportunities that they did have. I look at this game as more like a bump in the road, so to speak, a hiccup. It's going to be interesting to see how this team bounces back from it. They've got FC Dallas this week, and then the first of three Hudson River Derby games on May 5th against the New York Red Bulls, who have had their own problems of their own. But, yeah, I agree with you. Bound to happen. Even Toronto FC, as good a year as they had last year, they came back down to earth somewhat near the end of the year last season. And you can't be perfect every game. And as well as this team has played on the road, and they've had a history this year. It's funny, all three games they played on the road, NYCFC fell behind early, did not play well in the first half, and then figured out how to get a result, whether it was a win or a draw. Yesterday, it just wasn't the case. And let's face it, you got to give props to Portland. They played well at home. And they took advantage of their chances when they had to, and that's the bottom line.
Next game for NYCFC is next Sunday on 6:30 p.m. at Yankee Stadium versus FC Dallas. And FC Dallas is a difficult team to handicap this year, which brings me to this thought process. When I look at the results of Atlanta and NYCFC on April 15th, the draw, it really is indicative of the forces present in the Eastern Conference in my mind. It's going to be a battle if things continue to go the way they are, of course. Atlanta, NYCFC. And those inter-conference battle will be important. Is that maybe a consolation prize to lose against Western Conference team? And even next Sunday against Dallas, it could be a game that has no repercussion to the season of NYCFC.
Yeah, because it's only, quote unquote, a 3-point swing, let's say, instead of a 6-point swing. It's not the end of the world if you lose to a team in the other conference. Saying that, you do want to continue your superiority at home. That's a big deal. You don't want to really give away points at home. And I think NYCFC or at least let's put it this way, Vieira will have them positioned to bounce back. I can't make predictions on how well they're going to play, but I think they're going to play better. I know David Villa started his first game against Portland on Sunday night since he had the calf injury a month ago. Yes, he came off the bench against Atlanta and scored a goal, but getting into the rhythm of things for a 90-minute encounter, that's something else, especially for a striker who needs to find his confidence over the long haul. And, for NYCFC to be successful this season, and they've had a lot of great contributions to players we weren't familiar with or didn't hear about until this year, I think they're going to need a David Villa in top form for the team to do well over 34 games. So, it won't be the end of the world if NYCFC loses to Dallas, which it could be a tough team when they put their act together. But I still think NYCFC's got to get minimum a draw, if not a victory at home this week.
Michael, I want to turn our attention to the Red Bulls now. You mentioned that they're having, quote-unquote, some problems of their own right now. Lost to Chicago over the weekend, 2-1. Are we seeing a hangover effect from the CCL, do you think?
I think so. Last week maybe it didn't hit them as much, or Montreal has its problems as well, too, and they took advantage of the impact. But, the Red Bulls, it's a tough situation. This is the furthest they've gone in the competition. I think they realized they put themselves in a hole with a 1-0 loss at Chivas, and they were playing well in the competition. I think everyone was expecting, or not everyone, but a lot of people were expecting an all MLS final, which would have been a lot of fun. But it's something that they're going to have to find a way to raise their level. This week they're headed for the West Coast, LA, and they're going to have to get their heads back into the game as soon as possible. I know it's funny, they were putting their first team out in the CONCACAF Champions League and essentially putting their reserve team playing in the early MLS matches. Now that first team has to play in MLS matches, and for those players, I think it's they've got to get their heads totally back in the game. I think they will eventually. It's just a matter of whether it will be sooner or later.
The Red Bulls are an interesting sort of long-term look in many ways. I'm wondering what their identity is. They obviously have that great USL team right now, and we saw the advantage of having sort of 1 to 30 depth during the CCL run, where they were able to get a result with a completely rotated squad. Is this a team, Michael, that you think long-term is going to move away from the old Red Bulls of big-name DP signings and instead focus internally on creating their own success through internal means?
They are definitely in that direction, no doubt about it. I think they'll obviously still bring in international players, but I just wonder if they're going to be bringing in players in the orbit of Thierry Henry, Tim Cahill, Juan Pablo Angel, which I think the team needs, I think, for attendance reasons, and that's another thing we can get into another time probably. But they like what they're doing with the homegrown products. Let's face it, in a place like New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, you've got thousands of kids playing soccer, and identifying the top players in the area is a major big deal with the team. It's a lot expensive to develop players than bringing in a big name player at the end of his career. Saying that, they've had a lot of success bringing up players through Red Bull 2 or homegrown, and Tyler Adams is the poster child for that. Poster boy, I should say. Then there's also Sean Davis, Derek Etienne, and a number of other players, Aaron Long as well too. So they like that system. Even though I know they play in an area where it demands having a star on your team, they might, it would be better if they would have a foreign or a South American quote-unquote star, but I think that's the way they're going to be going. Saying that, they did bring in a young Argentine player, Kaku, who has shown a lot of promise, and the jury is still out on how much production and how much he will change the midfield for the team this year.
Micheal, you mentioned the attendance, and it's a topic that I don't necessarily like to talk about a lot because there's a lot of variables in explaining, especially in this time of year, why is there butts in seats or not. My angle that I'm going to ask you on this topic is, we all seen the attendances at Red Bull Arena, not just this year, over the last few years. Is it important? And when I say important, is it dangerous in the long run, the lack of presence of fans in the seats? We know they're making money. We know outside of butts in seats, Red Bulls do have a certain amount of momentum, a certain amount of following and social media and all of those. But when you looking at the butts in seats and the perception of non-popularity on the television screen when you're watching the New York Red Bulls, is that perception dangerous in the long run?
Yeah, I think it is, because you want to show the world and even the fans that are not at the game that there's a lot of interest. Basically, when you take a look at empty seats at the stadium, you're thinking, oh, I don't have to worry about buying tickets until the day of the game. You're not making that commitment beforehand, which will help maybe sell out a team. It is a confounding situation for the Red Bulls, and they're not by themselves in this. There are a lot of original MLS teams from the 1996 season that are having trouble filling up their stadiums on a regular basis. And Columbus Crew is a familiar story. We all know about that situation, about the possibility of the team moving to Austin. But there's FC Dallas too, and a few other teams. For every Toronto, Seattle, and Atlanta, there is a New York Red Bulls, Columbus Crew, or FC Dallas, and even sometimes
Chicago,
DC United, although I think that's going to be remedied by their new stadium, at least for the time being. I'm sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say there's Chicago as well that we always include in this conversation, looking at Toyota Park and the lack of commitment of fans there too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't have the attendance figures in front of me, so I was just going through some of the ones that hit me and that I know offhand. But yeah, and it's again these older franchises that might have soccer. They're around so much. I think maybe soccer fans take them for granted. Perhaps some of them aren't. And this is a supposition by me. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, but maybe they're not doing as many promotions as they did in the past, or the correct promotions. I don't know, but I just remember the year after Columbus won the MLS Cup, and this was 2009. And early on, they weren't filling up the stadium that year, and I was surprised about that. And I'm not picking just on them, but the Red Bulls situation, even though they don't have these big stars on the team, they are fun to watch at home. I mean, you do have Bradley Wright Phillips, who might not have a big name, but he puts the ball in the net on a regular basis, especially at home. And what's not to like about or love about that? And it's interesting. Me and a few of the other sports writers were talking a couple of weeks ago about maybe the fan base isn't as big as we thought it was. And you might be saying again, hey, you talked about thousands of players in the New York, New Jersey area, but maybe, let's face it, NYCFC coming into the league might have split some of that fan base, and that people who used to go out to Red Bull Arena from New York now are going to NYCFC. And again, people might say, how can fans all of a sudden turn from being a supporter of one club to another? Sometimes economics has something to do with it, but that's, I guess, another subject for another time.
Speaking of subjects that may be better for another time, but nonetheless, I'll bring it up now because we do typically talk about that third team that is in New York that is sort of still there. I don't know. That's my question. Are the New York Cosmos dead? I know they're going to play an MPSL season this year, but have we seen the last of them, do you think?
That's a good question. I think it comes down to if there is going to be a professional league for them to play in. They're not going to play in the USL or MLS, obviously. There's a Cosmos B team. Actually, I went out to watch them play this weekend. They played a college team, Long Island University at CW Post College. They won 5-1. I think they're looking at what they have, the players they brought in, the quality. They'll be a competitive team in the National Premier Soccer League this year. It's a very small schedule, regular season schedule of 10 games. But like I said, I think they will, well, I think they'll be more than competitive. They should have a winning record. The big thing is whether or not the North American Soccer League returns in 2019, or does the NPSL come up with a pro division? Or perhaps there's another league that is created that has a pro division. That's what will determine the Cosmos' future. But the Cosmos are still around. Maybe not the Cosmos that we are familiar with, but Cosmos B team, coached by the former Cosmos captain, Carlos Mendez, in his first coaching position. And in fact, as it turns out, they play at Boston City FC in their league opener this Sunday.
Michael, before we say goodbye, is there anything in particular you want to promote from your good work?
Well, I'm the editor of FrontRowSoccer.com, trying to cover soccer in the New York area. And I say trying because sometimes too many things happen all at once, but try to get a little of everything onto the website. It's almost like feast or famine. Nothing happens for a day or two, and it seems like everything happens all at once. But that's the way life is in the news and sports industry, especially in soccer these days.
All right, Michael, thanks again for your time. As always, we'll talk down the line. We're going to take a quick little break, come back. We'll have some sound from Mark Anthony K that Kevin got, and then we'll review the Canadian results from the weekend.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
I'm here with Mark Anthony K. Mark, how have the last few months have been for you?
They've been a whirlwind, coming into the MLS with a new franchise team, and then I guess getting in on the majority of the games, and we're doing well, so it's been really good.
How was your first game in Canada this week for an MLS team? Did you notice it was something special? Maybe a little bit more text from friends saying good luck for today?
You know what? I think it just feels like a normal game, to be honest. It's always nice coming back home in Canada, but I think once you get on the field, you forget about it and realize that you're just looking for 3 points. But it is always nice to come back and play.
When you look at your game since Louisville, since last few years and this year, what has really stepped up in your mind?
I think, just the intensity of my play. I'm lucky to be here with Bob and his coaching staff because it really helped me hone in on the technical aspect of the game, just play simple and stuff like that. So I think it's just always extra work, right? And once you put in the extra work, then eventually the product on the field gets better.
You have in your coaching staff this year, Marco Santos. Usually you used to play against him in the USL. How is it to have him on your side?
Oh, it's great. Like I said, the coaching staff here, they've built this unbelievable. It's just made for player success. And for me being a young player, I'm just really happy to be here, and I look forward to more days and more training sessions with them.
just to finish, you have a lot of people following from the GTA region, of course, from your home region. What do you have to say to them?
I would say, thank you for all the support, especially, I'm all the way in LA, but I feel like home's always closed, so, I thank them a lot because it's tough when you move away, but they always make me feel like I'm at home no matter where I'm at, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Have a good season.
Thank you.
Thanks to Mark Anthony K and Duane. Sorry, Duane. You're not Mark. You're not playing in MLS. Duane, one thing that you know me about, you know me in my audio. So when I hear fans in the middle of hallways, it really makes me angry when I'm trying to record. But thanks to Mark Anthony K for his time today, and thanks to LAFC for making this happen, and for my Marc Dos Santos interview as well in exclusivity. If you want to listen to Mark in French say his thoughts on the last few months, I suggest you listen to my French show that came out Saturday.
Anything of a note you want to translate for that one, or was it pretty standard stuff?
The one thing important that I think Marc Dos Santos mentioned is his relationship with Laurent Simon. And when Laurent Simon, we'll talk about the game too. It's a good segue into LAFC against Montreal. I guess I have to talk about it. Man, 8 goals. Could have been 12. But Laurent Simon's free kick goal is just an example of what Laurent Simon has been shown his confidence to do. There's a few things in that goal. There's 2 coaches that are involved in that play. Is the goalkeeper coach, Zach, always mentioned to Laurent Simon over the last few months when he's been training with LA, if there's a free kick that's about 25 to 30 yards out, you got a special floating type of shot, you should take it. Yes, 90% of the time is going to end up in the stands, but 10% of the time is going to end up in the back of the net, and one of those 10% were Saturday. So there's that aspect, and there's Marc Dos Santos. Marc Dos Santos and Laurent Simon, of course, because of the language, both speak in French. Marc Dos Santos speaks about 35 languages, so he has a relationship with a lot of people. But as a player, Laurent Simon found a francophone head coach that has experience in Montreal. That was, let's face it here, Marc Dos Santos, when he left, had a little chip on his shoulder too. They were maybe both a bit hard done by the way they exited Montreal, respectively, 2009 for MDS and last year for Laurent Simon. So all those little pieces, and of course the love of the city of Montreal, the city of Marc Dos Santos, where he was raised, and of course Laurent Simon's first foray into North American soccer in Montreal, with 3 years of falling in love with the fans. So you have that special relationship that has been created, and we're seeing the results of it with Laurent Simon having a couple of great games at the beginning of the season, and Marc Dos Santos is one of those reasons why.
Yeah, I would have to think that MDS, especially with the success that LAFC has had this year, a bizarre success, but success nonetheless so far, will be very close to the top of most lists when their head coaching positions open up for next year. So good for him. And
especially when you look at what Marc Dos Santos' job is during games. I was looking at Marc Dos Santos, especially yesterday, and he was with the substitutes. He was making them train, giving them information, preparing them for their walk into the pitch, and preparing them for the upcoming plays. And we've seen LA outcoach Rémi Garde. Bob Bradley outcoach, but it's not just Bob, it's Bob majority, but I think MDS has his words in there as well. They outcoached and outreacted Montreal. It took forever for Rémi Garde to react, and I do have a feeling that delayed reaction, which was a Kroliki substitution in the 80th minute when you were down to 10 men after 30 and players out of position, that wait for that reaction from Rémi Garde, I think is a big indication that he doesn't trust his bench at a full capacity. And I do have a feeling that LAFC's reaction shows that Bob Bradley trusts every single one of its players, no matter if they're from the USL and Canadian. And I just want to say a couple words on Mark Anthony K. It wasn't his best game this season. It wasn't the easiest game this season. He was a bit stuck on an island sometimes, and playing in front of Piatti is not always easy, but it was fun to watch Canadian content, a lot of Canadian content this weekend when we're looking at Jordan Harvey, Mark Anthony K. You're talking about Dejan Jakovic and company on the Montreal side. So there was a lot of Canadian content, but unfortunately, the American team or the Canadian men's national team South left with 3 points.
Yeah, they're with hockey scores. I think the NHL would be happy with LAFC scores. Really, it would probably increase their But yeah, it's LAFC. We should get Alicia on or someone else on to talk about the MAK because they're an interesting story this year for sure.
Oh yeah, and interesting story is the amount of goals scored this weekend, Duane. 43 goals scored in the entirety of the league, but we're in the Canadian Review here. Yes, Montreal lost 5-3 at home. It could. We're going to talk about Alan Chapman in a second and all that, but 16-4. That's the aggregate of Canadian and American scores this weekend. Canada lost to the United States 16-4.
Yeah, no, it was pretty ugly across the board for various reasons. All three games have their own sort of stories, and none of those stories are good. Real quickly, before we do go further into this Canadian Review, I do want to mention that any Ottawa Fury fans listening out there, we will have a review of that game on USL Radio, which will come down the pipe either tomorrow or Wednesday. They won one draw there for North Carolina. If you want to listen to TFC2's home opener wrap, that is already out on the network. Again, both TFC2 and the Ottawa Fury, outside of feature interviews with names from those teams, will be primarily on their own show this year, USL Radio, which I will record each and every week with experts that follow those teams very closely. Kevin, as I said, each of those games have their own story. Montreal's story is the inability to hold on after the red card, I suppose. Is there something to take away?
Inability to defend, and if I'm telling you on any given soccer game, you're going to have one player score 3 goals, your best player score a hat trick, and your goalkeeper make 14 saves. You would think you would win the game, right? You would think you would win that game, but you would be wrong. 14 saves wasn't enough for Evan Bush, and only one of those goals were really Evan Bush's fault, and that was the second goal of LAFC, the one that was far right corner. Outside of that one, I don't really blame Evan Bush on the penalty. He saved the penalty for the second time this year. That is surprising. His play has been really great this year, and you can tell the difference of philosophy and instincts that Joel Batz, the new goalkeeper coach from Montreal this season, has been able to instill in him really quickly. And I feel that Evan Bush knows that there's a goalkeeper behind him, Clément Diop, that is just waiting for his opportunity. And you never want to leave an opportunity open because you might lose your spot. But those 5 goals conceded, those fouls in the box, fans and journalists and pundits and everyone blaming referees. Oh, Alan Chapman was not calling things for Montreal. He called him for the other side. I'm not saying I disagree. I'm not saying I agree. It is what it is. And at the point that we are in now, it's 2018. It's the 7th season of Montreal Impact. We've been watching this league since way before that. We know. We should know better. Don't do a quote-unquote 50-50 tackle in the box because you know you're going to get called on you if the guy let himself falls to the ground. We should know better by now.
No, I say this all the time, especially we'll take all the partisanship out of this and put Canada on the board here. I've long been critical of the Canadian national team for not adapting to CONCACAF refereeing. CONCACAF refereeing is horrible. There's no doubt about it. It's frustrating, but there's a pattern that you should be able to figure out after, well, in their case, 30 years, right? And they don't seem to.
Yeah.
Let's take, I'll go another sport altogether. Every time Canada plays an international hockey tournament, bingo card alert, every time they play an international hockey tournament, what do we hear? Oh, these referees, that wouldn't be a penalty here. Yeah, well, we've been doing this for 50 years. It's a penalty there. Get used to it, right? Yeah. It's a similar thing here. You gotta be adjust to the realities that are out there. You know they're out there. And I mean that we'll talk about the Whitecaps maybe next. Same deal. You can't do this stuff. I think that was an idiotic sort of VAR. You know my opinion on VAR. The Whitecaps situation with the 2 reds at once. I don't know what was said to get the verbal one, so I'll reserve comment there. But I don't like the red card they gave for VAR. It's being pedantic, right? Like, it's taking common sense and the ability to control a game, but it's the reality. As much as I don't like it, if I was managing a team, I'd go, look, there's VAR. Keep your damn hands off people's face. Period. You're going to get a red card. Yeah. There's VAR. You've got to learn.
And for me, it's the same thing when we're looking at Nacho Piatti, because the main foul in the game versus Montreal versus LA that got people's ire up is the penalty on Piatti, where Piatti gets tackled in the box at the 80th minute by Zimmerman and Simon. Literally gets tripped, run over, and tackled in like an elbow drop. No call. And in my mind, it's a bit because of reputation. And that's something that has to change, and I'm not blaming Piatti for this. It's a circumstance, and I'm not taking sides here. I'm not saying he should have that reputation or he shouldn't have that reputation. I'm just saying that reputation is there. And once it's Piatti, because of how he moves, how a few embellishments maybe over the years have given him that reputation, that he doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. He gets stripped, guess what? The referee's first instinct is to say, well, it was a 50-50. I won't give it. If it's someone else, maybe he doesn't have that instinct. So I'm just saying those calls are reputation calls. And it's a bit a shame that, because a foul is a foul, doesn't matter what the reputation of the player is. But because of perception and because of referees trying to manage a game, and they'll maybe sometimes look at the number of the players before actually calling the foul, because technically it's not important, but I guess it has become important who does or who receives the foul. Did he embellish it? What's his reputation? All those in a fraction of a second. And I think it's too much to ask for a referee. You see a foul, you call it. You don't look at who is it. You don't look at you don't think of the reputation of the player. Oh, is he playing with me? Is he not? But that was unfortunate. Montreal would have still lost that game. I'm not saying otherwise, but reputation. Either you agree that Piatti has a reputation or you disagree. You can't negate that it seems to be present.
Yeah, no doubt. Look, it's not just MLS. I think of players like Luis Suarez, Raheem Sterling, guys like that play at higher levels. They've developed reputations over the years for going down too easily, and as a result, you see it all the time. I saw a photo in Suarez's last year at Liverpool. I watched a lot of those games. And yeah, he does go down easy, but he also gets fouled a lot. And there was a photo that Liverpool sent out after the games, which his entire leg was just blood, and he didn't get any calls that game, right? Like, they clearly get fouled, and their reputation precedes them. And it's it's imperfect refereeing, but you got to adjust and you got to realize. And when it comes to players who have those reputations, I mean, the lesson here is that there's a bit of karma happening. If you dive too much in an early part of your career, well, it might bite you in the bum in the end of the career, right? But moving on. I mean, look, not a great result. I guess my final question on Montreal is what was the mood of the crowd as they were? I know you had work to do after, but as far as you could tell, what was the mood of the fan base after that they blew that lead?
They were not happy. They were, the red card at the 30th minute for Victor Cabrera, which we didn't talk about. But that red card, I had to look really, really closely at the footage to find the reason why he had a red card, to find why this red card was. At the beginning, I thought maybe one of these flailing arms hit him. No. I really think it has to do with the fact that it was a clear-cut opportunity versus the goalkeeper, and he was the last man, and he got tripped kind of. But in hindsight, this really difficult tackle that they did for Cabrera and that red card, that call, it was a bit unfair. So I don't know if it's going to change anything in the future, but that call really changed the game. And that call against Cabrera, for me, was a bit unfair. I don't know what you think, Duane.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was for sure. It was probably a bit unfair, as you say, and I don't know. It's over the course of the year. I guess you just hope that they calls even out, but it's unfortunate that we have to talk about it all the time.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that call changed the entirety of the game, and we'll see if the disciplinary committee overturned the red card, because if it doesn't, Montreal really needs new center backs again next week with the injury of the Rod Fanny, and now maybe the absence of Victor Cabrera, the injury to Diallo, to Fisher. You got Rudy Camacho, and pretty much that's it left. So, yeah, Montreal's backline is gonna be tested once again next week.
All right. I think the Whitecaps is going to be a longer discussion, so we'll squeeze TFC in here quickly. I don't know what more to say about a 5-1 loss with basically, like, we're joking about USL games, but it's not even a joke. They signed 2 players before the game just to fill out the roster spots. There weren't a lot of highlights. Jordan Hamilton was just a second off the run, and it was the correct call to call him offside to get a goal. We did see a goal by Tainter, who was a draft pick last year is a great signing for TFC2.
On loan from Sacramento Republic?
Yeah, exactly. Well, he'll be back, and I suspect that he'll end up probably getting some time with TFC too if they do keep him around. But yeah, look. I don't know if I don't even know if it's worth breaking this game down, other than to say what it means for the overall history. Obviously, TFC is entirely focused on Wednesday night, as you would imagine they would be. It was not a great defensive result. They looked okay in other aspects of the field. The Argentine, who I had an opportunity to see live on Wednesday, Micheal, he is a very interesting prospect. If you listen to USL Radio, we talk a little bit about this and how TFC is kind of using TFC2 right now as like a trialist place. They bring guys in that are they're not entirely sure on from overseas to see how they adapt to North America, and then we'll sign them to the full first team if they are. I think with Milo, Milo, M-I-L-O. I'm not entirely sure how they're choosing to pronounce this or what he's going to go with, but that's what we're saying for now. This is a guy that's very creative on the ball that might actually have an opportunity to do some significant things in reserve ball for TFC proper this year, and certainly will be worth the price of admission to go watch TFC 2 games. He was, his first game in TFC 2 on Wednesday, he was exciting and creating, and he created the penalty at the end that unfortunately they couldn't convert. So other than that, those couple bright spots there, not much more to say. So unless you have anything to add, let's just jump to Vancouver, Kevin.
All eyes on Mexico. All eyes on Guadalajara. That's what's going on for TFC this weekend. And now moving on to the Vancouver Whitecaps. Kansas City put a marker on them. Kansas City scored not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, but 6 goals against Vancouver.
The worst defeat by a Canadian team in MLS play history. The Vancouver Whitecaps. It ties the record for the worst defeat by a Canadian MLS team, which Impact fans will be joyful to remember because that would be against TFC.
In 2013, 6-0. Justin Mapp, 2 goals. DeVayo, 2 goals. For some reason, it's like imprinted on my mind. Anyways.
Yeah, that was in a Voyageurs Cup game, obviously, so it wasn't an MLS play. So, yeah, not a good day at the office for the Whitecaps. And a lot of discontent in that market right now. And a lot of the frustration is towards Carl Robinson, as you might imagine. He didn't help himself in the post-game comments. Out there, you know how coaches will get like verbal tics that they rely on, cliches. Excuse me. For Carl Robinson, his cliche is he uses the term fine lines. The games are a fine line between winning and losing. And after losing 6-0, he dropped the fine lines again, and people are like, they lost it on him.
Well, yeah, it's a fine line, but how do you define fine? Is it still big enough that you can put 6 goals on that line? Apparently it is.
Yeah. Look, you got to talk about the incident. As I said earlier, based on the pedantic interpretation of the rules, it was the right call. And if you believe that we should referee games using pedantic interpretation of rules, and you love VAR because of that, even if you're a Whitecaps fan, you can't complain. This is exactly what you're going to get. This is why I don't like VAR. I think that could have been controlled by a referee, pulling those players aside, showing a couple yellows, saying, calm the blank down, otherwise I'm going to have to show you off. But because VAR is in place, because the rules are written in such a way that there's no interpretation there, he couldn't do that. So we go down to 9 men for a long stretch of time, but that's not why they lost. They were down 3-0 at that point. So, yeah.
Well, Kansas City, for once, Kansas City's defense was able to hold on. That has been the criticism so far. Sporting Kansas City, if not one of the best teams in the Western Conference so far in 2018. Their backlash this year so far was coming because of their defensive capabilities. Yes, they were still winning game, but winning 4-3, 3-2, and not being able to win the close one. This one wasn't close at all, but they kept a clean sheet. Melia was doing a great job too there.
It's hard to really evaluate too much because it was 9 men, obviously. But this is what I'll say, and to be Whitecap-centric a little bit here, there was no fight. There was no pushback after they went down to 9. They just collapsed and were lucky to only give up what they did. I have watched games when it got down to 9 before where teams get motivated to show some pride. they don't want to be embarrassed. I remember distinctly the game that San Jose beat TFC with 9 men. It was a fluke goal and a goaltending error, but nonetheless, the point of that is how well they defended, how intensely they defended. So it is possible, difficult, and not very often will it succeed completely, but it is possible to certainly show some dignity when you go down to 9 and not get embarrassed, and the Whitecaps didn't. And this is 2 weeks in a row where they've just not looked like they had any ideas or any sort of drive to break through a malaise. And that's a problem. And it's a problem that's hard to put a finger on. You can look at their overall talent level, and I think that there's holes in that roster, but, the lack of a true game breaker being the biggest one of all. But they're not terrible. They're certainly not, they shouldn't look as bad as they have the last 2 weeks. And at some point, as much as I am not a fire the manager guy, I don't think it is often, it should never be your first solution, and it often is. But that said, at some point you have to look at Carl Robinson. You have to look at his plan, his tactics, his signings, his ability to motivate and maintain control of that room. And when you watch the results, you have to start to question it. And they have a big stretch now. I think it's 4 of 6 at home. This is going to be telling. And I do think that if they don't turn something around here, if they end up, playing like 1 point a game or something, like 1 point per game, the average through this stretch when they have all these home dates, Carl Robinson's job might be in jeopardy.
Yeah, we'll see. And there's always a question as well of, is other big name coaches could be losing their job too when it creates an opportunity, and then Lenarduzzi pulls the trigger in Vancouver. That's possibly the case. And just to finish the show, Duane, quickly, apparently Siggy Schmidt might be on his way out to in LA. So we're hearing that too. So in the same vein, since Zlatan came, yes, you had that big game, that big win, 4-3 against the rival, the Angels. But since then, hasn't been as easy as anticipated, and the Zlatan era reminds me a lot of the beginning of the Beckham era.
No, for sure, yeah. Real quickly, just a news piece. For those that haven't seen it, the CONCACAF U17 qualifying tournament for the women was canceled yesterday due to security concerns in Nicaragua. And if you're not following the news,
I was gonna say exactly what you mentioned. 24 dead in the last few days in Nicaragua. There is a big protest in the streets. There's a civil unrest that has something to do with the pension plans of retirees and other social injustice and social battles and wars that are going on, and it's creating a very tense and dangerous situation, and the security of the players could not be guaranteed, and they decided to cancel it.
Yeah, I mean, you can criticize them for going down there in the first place. They probably could have anticipated this, but sometimes these things do blow up pretty fast. We don't know much more than that in terms of rescheduling right now. Canada did open up that tournament with maybe a little bit harder than it needed to be, 3-0 win over Bermuda. We're scheduled to play Costa Rica in what would have been their key game of the group stage on Sunday. I suspect what we'll see, the World Cup is actually not until November, so they have some flexibility here. I suspect that probably early summer, where you can't play during the World Cup. That's FIFA doesn't allow that, but probably just before that, perhaps they'll go down and finish it in the States. I suspect is what will happen with this one. So obviously in situations like that, you have to take safety over the priority of these games, but we'll keep an eye on that and update you if we hear anything else. Kevin, on that note, I'll say goodbye for the day. As I said, Ottawa Fury coverage, look for USL Radio a little bit later on this week. A couple of special shows. I'll be up with Sober Second Thoughts after the CONCACAF Champions League game on Wednesday. But I'm going to shut up for now. Kevin, you say goodbye.
Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube right now. Click the subscribe button and make sure you click the notification bell to the right of it to make sure you're notified whenever we go live Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. on youtube.com/sports podcasting network. Make sure if you're a Canadian soccer fan, you like Canadian soccer, you want to know more about the Canadian Premier League, patreon.com/sports podcasting network. We're going to try to record the show tomorrow this weekend. If you want to have information, clear-cut information, actual scoops and breaking news, tomorrow you will be served during the Two Solitude Soccer Podcast. Our sources have been active and we got some great names and news to talk about and to reveal tomorrow on the Two Solitude Soccer Podcast for patrons only. Make sure you put your $2 in before the show comes out tomorrow. And as always, until then, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.